Have prosecutors in the so-called asbestos scam tender trial perhaps shot themselves in the foot? They may have, on a silver platter, handed corruption co-accused Ace Magashule, the well-known former ANC Secretary-General, and 17 others a real reason to celebrate this weekend. Whilst the state insists this alleged rogues gallery enjoyed a, quote, thieves' picnic at the expense of the taxpayer, a special plea by Magashule's one-time personal assistant has forced such a spanner in the National Prosecuting Authority's case against them.
I feel desperately sorry for that prosecution team in Free State because they did everything by the book, but they have been fundamentally, and I will die on this hill, let down by the leadership of the NPA in terms of their handling of this very crucial case, which I have to tell you is not going to just impact on Charlotta, but will impact on a number of other cases.
Prominent legal journalist Karyn Maughan and I will catch you up with all the details of this trial next. Later in the show, South Africa's new traffic fine demerit system gets the 1 October start date. And finally, some possible South African snow is forecast for the coming days.
To stay tuned to The Lead for every edition, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels.
Good news, you can now send a short voice note of around 15 to 20 seconds with your questions or thoughts on this episode to our official The Lead WhatsApp line on 072 562 3179. That's 072 562 3179. Listen out at the end of this episode to hear your voice notes. You can also mail us thelead@24.com. My name's Graham Robenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. She's a free woman. The ex-one-time assistant of former Free State Premier Ace Magashule, that's Morwadi Charlotta, has now won her special plea brought against the National Prosecuting Authority. The former corruption accused succeeded in convincing the Free State High Court in Bloemfontein to declare her extradition from the United States as unlawful. Thus, it leaves the NPA to lick its wounds as legal experts now weigh in, warning that this trial within a trial will have its consequences ultimately on the criminal trial. To decipher the legal meaning here, legal journalist Karyn Maughan joins me now from our Johannesburg studios. Karyn, thank you so much for your time and welcome back to The Lead.
Thank you for having me.
This is quite an interesting case because there's certainly some precedents here, and it's had a lot of bearing on people's calls for accountability when it comes to the entire question of corruption in South Africa today. And I just want to start off very quickly, Karyn, and just indulge me for a second. I just want to remind our Leeds listeners on the basic tenets of this case thus far. So we know that in 2014, and help me correct me if I perhaps have this incorrectly.
Yeah, well.
In 2014, the Free State Provincial Human Settlements Department, it awards this contract to the Blackhead Consulting Venture to audit and remove asbestos from homes in the Free State. Then we see that the company ultimately got 21 million rand. So it only gets a fraction of the pie because it subcontracted quite a lot throughout. And so 230 million rand goes left, right, and center into all sorts of pockets. And in the end, Free State homes thus still sit with asbestos today. We've previously heard from prosecutors saying that this ultimately resulted in what they call a thieves' picnic. Magashule and 17 others, including, of course, the controversial Blackhead Consulting businessman Edwin Sodi, they all then declared themselves not guilty. That were their pleas in this 255 million rand scheme. My question to you is, we knew about the extradition of Miss Charlotta. She was brought back to this country not as a state witness, but as an accused. Let's first give the background. What was her alleged role in this matter, first and foremost, once she became an accused?
Well, the essential thing was that the state wanted her to be a potential Section 204 witness. Now, under the Criminal Procedure Act, a Section 204 witness is someone whose potentially implicated in a crime, but gets immunity from prosecution in exchange for their honest evidence about that particular crime. And it's very apparent from the litigation that surrounded the extradition, because Moradi Chilotta did attempt to challenge her extradition unsuccessfully in the Constitutional Court, that the state believed that she had been effectively ordered by Magashule to send emails to murdered businessman Igo Pembeni, who was one of the major beneficiaries of the so-called asbestos scam. Shortly after payments were made unlawfully, the state says, because the Auditor General had declared the whole asbestos project highly irregular. And essentially that she sent these emails asking for what the state alleges were the corrupt benefits, as it were, that Magashule received for his role in this allegedly corrupt enterprise. And it was very apparent because Moradi Chilotta, as people will remember, gave evidence at the state capture inquiry that she was the person who had sent those emails. And so the state wanted her to explain the circumstances under which that happened. And she said because she refused to, quote unquote, falsely implicate Magashule in those emails, she alleged that the state then prosecuted her. Of course, the state said she swung from offering to be a cooperative witness to then becoming decidedly uncooperative, and this was the reason why they decided to charge her.
Okay, so she was a state witness. We understand that, of course, she was studying politics, I think, or political science in the US at the time. She then gets this visit from some senior Hawks officials. They want to question her. And it's now, according to the court records, and it's we now understand that it's alleged that she then got uncooperative. And so this is why we've thus then seen the shift to suspect and thus accused, right? That's basically what happened. And then they had to go to the local jurisdiction of the US courts to then get a ruling that would then ratify the extradition. Do I have that correctly?
Yes. Remember that this is really the essential issue that's going to define why Moradi Chilotta was able to succeed in the special plea application that she did. In order for a person to be extradited, you need to persuade the local authority in that particular jurisdiction, which is the attorney's office in the US, that you indeed do have a case that the person that is of an equivocal charge in the United States, and that indeed you have enough evidence to sustain that prosecution if the person is brought back to South Africa. And that's essentially what the National Prosecuting Authority succeeded in doing. And a Maryland judge or magistrate ultimately did find in favor of the American authorities who brought that application on behalf of the South African NPA, and they did grant her extradition. She subsequently made an appeal to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Of course, this was during the Biden administration before Donald Trump was elected, and that, alleging all kinds of inappropriate political motivations to her prosecution and her extradition. That was unsuccessful. She was brought back to South Africa and she was charged. And Graham, I'm sure your listeners may or may not remember, but the NPA was adamant that they didn't want her to get bail. They said that she was a flight risk. They had grave concerns about her being released. Ultimately, unsuccessful in that argument, she was released on bail, and part of that bail process would form part of her special plea accusations against the state of various nefarious and unlawful undue process against her.
Of course, and now this moves to the trial within a trial. Most criminal or legal journalists covering this will say it's a huge headache. Suddenly it makes the writing of this particular story so complex. But in this particular case, thanks to you and, of course, your colleague Bernadette Wicks, who's done a fantastic job as well. And we got to tell our listeners that, in fact, her as our colleague, she's done a lot of the legwork of the trial this week, whilst Karyn was busy with the arms deal corruption trial and focusing on the analysis there. This trial within a trial, essentially, as I understand it, as watching from afar, Karyn, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Ms. Chilotta's essentially come to the NPA and to the judge in the Free State High Court and said, hey, the NPA did not have the correct jurisdiction to bring me back to this country to stand trial in this particular criminal case because the Supreme Court of Appeal had already ruled in a separate case, not to do with Ms. Chilota, that essentially sets a new precedence. What is that case and what's the precedence?
Well, this is what is so fascinating about this whole situation. And you're right, Bernadette Wicks has done phenomenal reporting on the special plea because essentially the special plea was largely fixated on Ms. Chilota's various allegations of wrongdoing against the National Prosecuting Authority in relation to her questioning, in relation to her becoming a suspect, in relation to her bail application. And essentially she was attacking the process that basically led to her extradition and the allegations that the NPA made to sustain it. And right at the tail end of that case, her advocate gets up and says, in any event, this application for extradition was stillborn because of the judgment that was given by the Supreme Court of Appeal, which is in itself in Bloemfontein, in relation to a case about so-called celebrity artist Jonathan Schultz, who the state had indicated it wanted to extradite over the alleged theft and sale of unwrought metals. And again, Bernadette, excellent coverage on this. And he succeeds in the Supreme Court of Appeal to challenge the validity of that extradition. And the court makes a very, very profound precedent-setting ruling, which we know from the Director of Public Prosecutions in Johannesburg, Andrew Chalke, will now affect, he said, 89 extraditions sought by the NPA, that says, no. The NPA does not have the legal right to seek an extradition. That process needs to be conducted by the Minister of Justice. And ergo, the consequence of that, as we have now found out very conclusively from Judge Philip Loubser, he said, well, I don't have a choice effectively because of that judgment, because the NPA applied for Ms. Chilota's extradition. The order for her extradition was granted, he said 2 months, it may be a matter of weeks after the SCA made that decision in the Schultz case. I really don't have a choice. The NPA does not, this court does not have the jurisdiction to try her, and quote unquote, she is now a free woman.
Now, the initial sort of criminal justice expertise or analysis here to this ruling that thus the extradition was thus unlawful and that the NPA did not have the jurisdiction here and it should have been the Justice Minister as set out now by this precedent within the SCA, which you so comically say is of course in the same city of Bloemfontein. Yes. That analysis now says that this has serious sort of bearings for the rest of the Magashule criminal trial, the asbestos alleged scam trial here. Why are experts weighing in? And perhaps it's not, the full sort of feeling across the board, but why are some experts at this time saying that this is a done deal now, that the NPA really has to reconsider how it takes its case forward?
I think that's an overblown analysis. I mean, I think the NPA has been has admitted, and that's why it wants this case now to be postponed, and it has been postponed until January next year, which is obviously quite a profound delay, is that it says that it wants, because of the cost implications and because they regard Ms. Chilota as potentially crucial aspect of their case, that they will now seek to challenge or essentially adhere themselves to the very strange attempted appeal that the NPA is now making in the Constitutional Court to that Jonathan Schultz judgment. And I mean, I have to be honest with you, Graham, big question marks for me as to whether the Con Court will even hear that case, given the strange way that the NPA has embarked upon it. But be that as it may, I don't think that, I think in relation to the case against Ace Magashule, Chilota's absence may be quite problematic for the case because she is a pivotal nexus point on their version between the murdered businessman Mpambeni and Magashule. She really is the point at which, so that's why they wanted her as a witness. So I can understand why there would be potential anxiety about the implications for their case against Magashule in relation to her absence. But I don't think the same applies for Edwin Sodi and all those all the various government ministers, senior officials that the state says we can show received benefits like, cars, money, etc., in exchange for their part in this deal. And, having witnessed the disastrous, collapse of the New Lane case, which the NPA has now appealed and will probably succeed in getting a real retrial in, you can say, look, something looks seriously and spectacularly dodgy. The fact that people get 255 million rand and then utilize 21 of it for an audit that the state says was completely inadequate and in any event unlawful, looks extremely questionable. But it really is a pivotal thing of outside the Charlotta dynamic. Does the state have the evidence to show that these various officials engaged in a corrupt scheme to make sure that tender happened? And I don't believe that Charlotta is strictly speaking relevant to that. And they also have a very, very in-depth forensic report, which we got to see dimensions of in the extradition case involving Charlotta. And that person, the forensic expert, is expected to be the third witness in this case. And I think that evidence is quite strong. But, I think that this is a blow for the state in terms of its case against Ace Magashule.
Sure. Okay. And we've heard from controversial businessman Edwin Sodi telling Bernadette Wicks, this outcome for Miss Charlotta has now quote unquote, set the tone for the rest of the trial, that this is a step in the right direction for us. With Magashule also telling our colleague, quote unquote, the following: the NPA is going to be embarrassed. This is embarrassment number 1, number 2, 3, and 4. And that Magashule himself says he can't wait until he gets his turn in the dock.
Look, as I said, I think this is very problematic, but I don't think you can necessarily blame it on the Free State prosecutors who were involved in this case. They did everything that they could. It was ultimately the NPA and its leadership who must have, as Loebscher points out, must have been aware. They were key parties in the Schultz litigation about the impact of that ruling. And yet we see this extraordinary situation where this very, very far-reaching judgment, we essentially see the NPA sitting on its hands for 4 months. And then when they do file an affidavit, acknowledge completely that this will have an impact on 89 different extraditions, but say that, simultaneously, while acknowledging how serious that is, say that, because of the government of national unity and uncertainty over who the justice minister would be, the NPA didn't move on this. And I think that's extraordinary for the state to say that. They then withdraw the appeal. Shamila Batoy on an affidavit now saying that was because, she felt that, the future of the extraditions could be negotiated with the justice minister and people didn't need to litigate, and very much framing a potential appeal as a potential source of conflict with the Justice Department, which I find to be quite a strange argument. But, then seeks to, effectively says, yes, we did withdraw this appeal, but then we realized that, we'd had this big meeting and we decided to do this, but without any lawyers present. And now we know that was the wrong idea. And now we want to basically withdraw our withdrawal and seek the reinstatement of this appeal. And of course, the Constitutional Court now has to engage itself with this. But Schultz's lawyers have piped up and said, hey, you never asked to bring the kind of challenge that you want to bring, because Batoya said, we don't want to challenge the merits of this. We just want to challenge its retrospectivity, which for our listeners obviously means what is the impact of this ruling on all the applications, these 89 extradition applications that the NPA has brought, which includes obviously Charlotta. We want to try and get an order that says that this can't be retrospectively applied because of the devastating impact that it will have and the hundreds of millions of rands that were spent and. But, Schultz's lawyers have turned around and said, you didn't make that case in the SCA. You have not breathed a word about retrospectivity, either in the High Court litigation over this case or in the SCA. How can you come now and ask the Constitutional Court to entertain this? So I feel desperately sorry for that prosecution team in Free State, because they did everything by the book, but they have been fundamentally and I will die on this hill, let down by the leadership of the NPA in terms of their handling of this very crucial case, which I have to tell you is not going to just impact on Charlotta, but will impact on a number of other cases, including the one of the co-accused in the Brian Hlongwa matter, who has successfully got an order against the NPA in regards to his extradition on the back of the Schultz ruling, which the state is now seeking to challenge and bring about a different form of application. But this is, I don't think we can understate how problematic this is going to be for the NPA.
Sure, and it's incredibly complicating. It's incredibly busy. It's messy, if you will. There's many
absolutely.
different and to the average person listening to this, we're 30 years into democracy. We continue to see court cases go straight to the Constitutional Court, delivering precedent-setting sort of values in the way we sort of trial people in this country. It still fascinates me. It's so interesting to see so many changes in the way we go about justice in this country. But to the average person listening to all of this right now, they go, well, what does this mean for the question of corruption accountability in this country? Your view there, Karyn, as before we get to the separate matter with the arms deal corruption trial, which I would love for you to so succinctly put in a nutshell, which is a challenge of itself.
I feel like the NPA has phenomenally dropped the ball here. And this, unfortunately, Graham, comes in the wake of a number of very serious ball droppings, where it was the Timothy Amatosa case, where we literally see the judge raising serious concerns about the honesty of the prosecutor in that case, to the point of actually resorting to herself removing that prosecutor. And the NPA sits on its hands and literally watches that case go up in flames. And of course, the hopes for justice of all the women who endured threats, abuse, and harassment to show the courage to get into the dock and testify against him. He's now, like there's major questions over they want to appeal, but, he's, to my understanding, effectively left the country. And I don't think there's any indication that he will necessarily return. We saw with New Lane, obviously there might be a retrial in that matter. We also saw the Eskom case against Magashule Koko being, removed from the role because the state had essentially done nothing struggled or not put severe impetus into obtaining a data analysis to analyze the slew of documentation that they had seized. And the court saying we're not prepared to allow those delays. Of course, the NPA have raised questions about the magistrate in that particular case. And our excellent colleague Carl Cowan has reported on his potential conflict of interest. But be that as it may, that case still has not been reinstated. The Estina dairy farm case, also in the Free State, struck from the roll because of delay issues in regards to the Gupta leaks, also not reinstated. And I think that, it just seems that our former colleague Quanta once wrote about Ramaphosa that he'd essentially quiet quit. And I can't wonder if that's not the case with Shamila Batoy. Because,
Sure.
The thing is, the prosecution service requires attention to detail. It requires that when you have a judgment that comes out in the SCA and says the way that you've been bringing about extraditions is legally wrong, and there's no sense from that judgment that it does not immediately apply, and you sit on that for months, lodge an appeal, withdraw an appeal, then realize you were wrong because you never consulted lawyers, and now are desperately trying to throw like a bucket of water on a huge flaming petrol-laden burning house. I think people would be right to sort of say, but what the hell are you actually doing here? Because it's not just about the prosecution service. It's about every South African who wants to have proper governance in this country. And it's about every single South African who wants to see people who are accused of serious crime having a fair and proper evidence-based trial. And ultimately, if they are guilty, being convicted. And we have not seen that for a very long time.
top of that burning pile you so alluded to, it could be, some would argue, the arms deal corruption trial stretching back, its implications, the tendrils of which coming all the way from the 90s. It's been one of the most talked about cases, I think, in modern contemporary South African history. You've played, somewhat of a chapter in its own right throughout this. Zuma and his team have pushed hard for veteran state prosecutor Billy Downer to be removed from here, arguing that he's not independent throughout. Now we see the latest in this particular matter, the judges, the prosecution team finally saying, listen, we're not going to entertain any further delays here. We're now going to bring the evidence that we'd always wanted to bring here to place on the record, and are saying that 2026 could be the year that gets underway. Do you buy that? Do you buy their confidence?
Well, I mean, the judge has not made a decision on that yet, but the National Prosecuting Authority advocate Billy Downer did say that the state is going to bring a formal application for the case to continue under section, I think it's 168 of the Criminal Procedure Act, to essentially say that if the accused want this case to be postponed while they bring their various appeal applications. And remember, Graham, that they've essentially raised the same, Zuma in particular has raised the same ground of appeal in multiple courtrooms over and over again, and unsuccessfully so, but seems to be hell-bent on just ignoring those judgments and making the same case over and over again as a mechanism to delay his judgment. And Billy Downer has said, look, under this particular section, the judge ultimately has a discretion to decide whether postponements are granted or not. And they're going to apply for, to say the accused must try and apply for the postponement of this case, but we don't believe that they have any grounds to do so. And we believe, in the interest of justice, in the interest of the South African public, but ultimately in the interest of rule of law, which says that we are all equal before the law and we must all face our day in court in the same way, that it is in the best interest of our society for this case to proceed. And of course, Advocate Dali and Paul Zuma, making a lot of noise and saying it's completely unthinkable that this would be allowed. But in the wake of the judgments that were given, particularly in the relation to the failed private prosecution that Zuma launched against Billy Downer and myself, the courts have said that was the zenith of the so-called Stalingrad litigation strategy, where you were so desperate to stop this prosecution from proceeding that you try to put your prosecutor in prison on a completely spurious basis, and then you went after a journalist who was reporting on your Stalingrad strategy. The courts have said that in no uncertain terms. And so by bringing that private prosecution, Jacob Zuma has arguably armed the state with its most powerful court findings to sustain an argument that, as Billy Downer says, the line needs to be drawn somewhere. And that case, in which is also due to sort of, return to court in December, is going to be pivotal to a make or break moment in our judicial system about the abusive use of Stalingrad litigation to avoid accountability. And I think all of us are sick and tired of seeing that happen and want the courts to take a stand.
Just be ready one day when I come to you and I say, please sign page 2 of the Maughan memoirs when you release that book, because I look forward to reading it, Karyn. Of course, the Free State asbestos alleged scam trial that we've been talking about in the majority of today's conversation on The Lead, that trial's now been postponed by 6 months to January 2026. We're going to have to wait some time still to see if the Constitutional Court is going to rule on the overall extradition precedent-setting matter there, and what bearing that's going to have on that particular trial. And of course, 2026 could also be one to watch when it comes to Zuma's long-standing case as well. Karyn, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Your piece, which is entitled How NPA Leadership Failures Set Chalota Free and Might Stymie Prosecutors' Appeal Efforts, penned by Karyn Maughan, leaning on the latest reporting by Bernadette Wex. That topic and that article still trending on the front page of News 24. Thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and chat soon.
Thank you, Graham.
Moving to our trending topic now, and it's about to become all the more difficult for errant drivers to evade traffic fines. Authorities have now confirmed to News 24 that the auto traffic demerit system will be coming into effect from 1 October this year. Breaking road rules will see motorists racking up demerit points collected on a national online database. 15 points, and you'll have your license suspended for 3 months. Do this again 3 times, and you may lose your legal right to drive. Now here's the thing, the system will spit out fines to you via email and SMS whether you like it or not, whether you see them or not. You'll be considered in receipt of these notifications. Full stop. There's added concern, though, that drivers with fake licenses can divert all of this. There's also the question of how this will affect the employability of professional working drivers like checkers, 60/60, delivery bikers, and freight truckers, whom we so depend on to keep the economy going. In a country with a high road fatality rate, a varied array of different vehicle uses, and inconsistent quality of roads, it'll be no doubt interesting watching the auto system finally in action after years of court battles over our capacity to see it come to fruition. Ever wondered what goes on in the minds of some of South Africa's most terrifying serial killers? Well, this month's free audiobook, only for News 24 subscribers, is Killer Stories, Conversations with South African Serial Murderers by Brian Hodgkiss and Nicole Engelbrecht. Here's a snippet narrated by Gavin Gomez.
It is sometimes the case with serial murderers that those hunting them are not aware of their serial nature until arrests are made. In several cases, it has been one offense that has led to the arrest, and then the offender himself will admit to many more murders. This is one such instance. On the eve of the dawning of the new South Africa in 1990s, the body of a homeless child called Sam was found at a primary school.
And finally, feel that chill in the air while we've been blessed by the first signs of snow. According to News 24's travel page Go, the white stuff had first fallen this year on the Swartberg and the Drakensberg in March. But the mercury is set to drop again as we head into the weekend and the new week, with a huge snow dumping forecasted for Lesotho, the Drakensberg and surrounds. The forecasters are saying we're almost guaranteed more snow across the KwaZulu-Natal mountain range this winter. Hogsback, for example, that magical place straight out of the Lord of the Rings over in the Eastern Cape, is likely to get some of the stuff too, whilst in the Free State, the chilliest towns normally are Clarence and Harrismith. Sutherland is the Karoo capital for snow, whilst in the Western Cape, the Matroosberg will be the place to be for a decent dusting later in June and July. But given the unpredictability of climate change, who knows? We may see snow sooner rather than later.
Are you burnt out from the week that was, but need to stay in the news loop? Every Saturday morning at 6, we release The Weekender, a quirky, in-depth look at South Africa and its people. Chock full of exclusive interviews, food, wine, playlists, and opinions, The Weekender is the ultimate segue into Saturday, right here on News 24.
From questions over corruption, case accountability, to promises of snow in the new week, we take the good news with the bad every week on The Lead. Thank you so much for all your correspondence over the last short while in response to our previous episode looking at the political future of one Mr. Floyd Shivambu in the MK party. Was he demoted as moving now to Parliament after being in a very critical position within the party, the Secretary General's office, while Magashule Matseke had mailed us and said, from politics to church, not a bad thing at all. The gentleman had went to interview at Malawi the same way he was interviewed by the MKP whilst working for the Red Beret. Thank you so much for your mail there. We also received this voice note on our new News 24 The Lead hotline. Have a listen here.
I don't feel shame for Shivambu because he just put himself in danger, dooming her future to MK. He was right at EFF. I don't know why he decided to go to MK. He didn't have any seat first day he came there.
Keep them coming. You can send your voice notes in response to any of our shows on the lead. We're almost nearing the 50 mark in terms of how many episodes we've had thus far. It's fantastic to see the show grow and grow. That all-important WhatsApp line, it's 072-562-3179, 072-562-3179. You can also mail us thelead@24.com. There's nothing much left to say other than have a fantastic weekend. My name's Graham Robenheimer. Stay warm, and so long as there's snow, we'll have the lead.